This is Reframe, the podcast from the College of Education, Health and Society on the campus of Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Everybody knows that exercise is good, but that's not the whole story. It's not just that exercise is good, it's also that not exercising is actually so much worse. A general lack of physical activity can lead to many chronic diseases and even cancer. So in this episode, we speak with Kyle Timmerman and Kevin Ballard, two accomplished exercise science researchers who have just been named fellows in the American College of Sports Medicine. Their work explores the mechanisms behind exercise science and how living a much healthier life might not actually be that hard for most people. Dr. Ballard, Dr. Timmerman, thank you so much for speaking with us today. What kind of things do you study within the field of exercise science? What's your expertise? Why is that important? Dr. Timmerman, can we start with you and then sort of break it down from there?
Want to go first?
Sure. Kevin's heard this 1,000 times. We each have our elevator pitch, but my research has been focused on inflammation, and inflammation always kind of gets a bad rap, so I try to put it in context. Inflammation can be both good and bad, depending on how you look at it. If you get an infection, you need to generate an inflammatory response to help clear that. But as we age, our baseline levels of inflammation start to slowly creep up. And Time magazine several years ago had Inflammation, the Silent Killer on it. And it was specifically talking about that gradual increase in our baseline levels of inflammation that predisposes to developing, you name a chronic disease, and it appears to have inflammation as kind of an underlying cause in its development and progression. But we know that people that are more physically active or that maintain a healthier body composition avoid that age-related inflammation. And if we could reduce inflammation, we could reduce the risk of developing cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, sarcopenia, which is age-related loss of muscle mass and function. And again, I could go on and on about the number of diseases that have that inflammatory link. And the better we can understand what are the pathways that are involved in conferring these anti-inflammatory effects, we understand better how kind of those diseases develop and progress as well.
And are there practical applications that people can do on their own, start doing right now, or does it take an intervention, a specialist to really get at those benefits?
We all know kind of that exercise is good for us, right? One of the biggest barriers, I think, is that folks don't know, a lot of people don't know, it's like, what's safe for me to do? What do we mean by exercise? And so I think people need to communicate to them, hey, in most studies we're talking about literally walking. We're talking about having them walk. And so, people have evaluated different modes of exercise or different intensities, but in the varieties of studies, if we take people that have been relatively physically inactive and just get them to do, light to moderate intensity exercise, and for most folks that can just be walking, you're going to see those benefits.
Dr. Ballard, how about you? What's your background, what's your expertise, and what do you study?
So similar to Kyle, I have a background in both exercise physiology as well as nutrition. So really over the past 10 to 12 years, I would say, my research has focused on the measurement of non-invasive measures of blood vessel function, which are related to the risk for the development of cardiovascular disease as well as other chronic diseases. And I've investigated a number of various lifestyle strategies, whether it be exercise or dietary strategies to improve vascular function. And then simultaneously looking at some of the mechanisms that may explain the improvements in vascular function we see with these various lifestyle strategies.
So when you talk about vascular function, how it relates to cardiovascular and heart disease and other chronic diseases, do you have a sense of how much of a pressing problem these issues are in society today?
Oh, well, we know now that at least 1/3 of U.S. adults are obese. When you talk about those that are overweight or obese, that's 2/3 of the population. So there's a large percentage there that are at a higher risk for developing chronic disease. So one of my first studies that I got started here when I came to Miami in 2015, really got interested in what impact sedentary behavior or physical inactivity has on vascular function. So we did a small study in just healthy men showing that 3 hours of prolonged sitting negatively impacts vascular function.
And I think that's such a cool way to look at it because, most of the studies in exercise science have focused on exercise and physical
Right.
activity. And so some of Kevin's studies are kind of looking at the flip side of that coin, and what about sedentary behavior? And there's been more research now looking at, hey, the kind of comparing and contrasting those two things.
Right.
Which is physical activity, which one of those has the kind of the greatest lever for potentially influencing your health?
Right.
So sedentary behaviors, clearly not healthy for you. I always joke to my students that I sit at my desk 6 hours a day writing about the benefits of physical activity as I'm being incredibly sedentary. So I enjoy seeing the literature and participating in research on, hey, the fact that I can go get my moderate to vigorous physical activity for 30 minutes per day helps offset a lot of that risk of sedentary behavior. And I think that's really important, because I think in general that we are a fairly sedentary society, and so that's, as Kevin's research would suggest, that's unhealthy. But if we can get people to do the recommended amounts of physical activity, that really helps offset kind of these negative impact of our largely sedentary lifestyles. So
Also, I think a lot of people probably think of sedentary behavior in terms of like extreme examples, but not realize how sedentary our modern life encourages us to be. Like our jobs that have us sitting at computers all day. And I mean, I don't exercise consciously as much as I should, but I try to take the stairs and things like that. But I imagine that's offset by all the computer work I do and all the commutes that we do, and also all the different streaming services that encourage us to watch even more TV.
Yeah.
So I think maybe even people who consider themselves to be healthy probably don't realize how sedentary they actually are.
yeah, the whole idea of Netflix binging.
Right.
Now Netflix has like a prompt that pops up, and it's like, there was one that's like, do you want to
really?
get up and go outside?
I haven't seen that.
I was like, oh man, how many episodes of The Office have I watched?
Really?
But yeah, I mean, it's you hit on it a lot. Is just what people think of, and I teach a class on exercise testing and prescription, and so this whole idea of how do we test somebody's fitness, and then how do we recommend physical activity to them, and kind of what you're mentioning is that you said I don't get up and do dedicated exercise, but I take the steps and things. I mean, that's an important concept to communicate to folks. That's beneficial. The New York Times just had an article based on a research study, I can't think of the authors of it, saying that, hey, even 5-minute chunks of activity, if that can add up to roughly 30 minutes or so per day, you're going to meet the recommendations for physical activity. And I guess we should throw that in. The American College of Sports Medicine, the American Heart Association recommend about 150 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous physical activity. And until 5 years ago, they would say, hey, we need that to be in 30-minute chunks.
Right.
And that can be daunting to some folks. But now people have started to parcel that out, researchers, and found, hey, you know what? People can still get the same benefit if they're accruing that 30 minutes in smaller chunks throughout the day. And to somebody who's been relatively sedentary through their life, that helps them, right? Because, hey, if I can just do a 5-minute walk before lunch, a 5-minute walk after lunch, walk with the kids or the dog or a friend after work, it doesn't take too much to get to that recommended amount of physical activity, versus if you tell somebody you have to go out and walk for 30 minutes in one bout, where it's much easier to say, hey, can you get in a handful of 5 or 10 minute bouts during the day? And it doesn't have to be on a treadmill. It doesn't have to be on an exercise bike. It can be, Kevin does a better job than I do of escaping the building and just going for
Right.
a walk on campus. That can add up.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I feel like a lot of people get daunted by how much of a change they probably think they need to make right away, and then get frustrated and quit if they can't make this huge transformation in their life right away. So I think, that seems very important to sort of communicate that incrementally building toward these good habits is super
I
important.
mean, eventually, I think we hope our research translates to somebody's going to use it. They're going to see what we're doing, and the public or clinicians will use it. And so it's we need people to start helping overcome those barriers. And the biggest barriers to exercise are time. And then so the research coming out saying, hey, I can get these in chunks. I don't have to get a gym membership. I can do smaller bouts. And then exercise is, a lot of people look at exercise as a 4-letter word, right? You picture like the Valley's Gym commercials where people are sweating and looking like they're exercising really hard, and people see that and it's like, that just looks hard. And then, so overcoming that idea that, again, you can meet the recommendations with walking. It doesn't have to be
Right.
lifting massive amounts of weights or sprinting on a treadmill or sprinting on a bike. And
Yeah, it should be something
Yeah.
that's enjoyable to the person,
Yeah.
but also that something that they can consistently do.
yeah,
That's going to be the key there.
yeah,
Exercise is not the same for everyone.
Yeah.
Some people enjoy running outside, others enjoy going to the gym, kind of doing their own thing.
Yeah.
The key is just to find something that you enjoy doing and stick with it.
yeah. Kevin's point's great. I mean, I always get students asking, "What's the best exercise?" And they'll throw it, "Oh, it's swimming, it's biking, it's," and then I always get to kind of to Kevin's point,
Right.
it's the one that you'll do.
Right.
it's the one that you'll do is the best exercise.
So, how dangerous is sedentary behavior? Is it even more dangerous than we realize?
Oh, some people have called it actually the new smoking.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So physical inactivity or sedentary behavior, prolonged sitting. Some people call it prolonged sitting. So people are really considering that a risk factor for chronic disease, whether that be cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or so on. But there's a number of I've seen some other papers showing that the more sedentary behavior that's associated with even the increased development of certain cancers.
Yeah.
Do you think this might actually even get worse from here? Since, I mean, a lot of the people who are working these jobs now and living these lifestyles full of technology, most of us are probably relatively young, so maybe these effects haven't even come to fruition yet. They haven't actually become as pronounced as they may be even down the road a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect that just because everyone has a cell phone now. Everyone has some sort of maybe gaming system where they're, or even TV where they're sitting for hours on end, and they're not as physically active as even a generation ago, I would say. So I think over the course of the next several decades, it's likely that the health problems associated with sedentary behavior are going to increase dramatically.
There's studies that just look at, screen time per day.
Yeah.
And so whether it's computer, or TV, or iPad, and then risk of, chronic disease. And again, I think that screen time is just, a reflection of the more screen time you have, the more sedentary.
Right. You're likely sitting in that.
We are, and so, but yeah, and to the diseases. I mean, I think the reason we focus on like cardiovascular disease risk factors or diabetes risk factors is, those are kind of two of the biggies for chronic diseases. But I mean, you go down a laundry list of chronic diseases or conditions, osteoporosis. I mentioned sarcopenia before. Kevin mentioned cancer. You name it. Then, being sedentary appears to increase your risk of many of these, and being more physically active can, decrease your risk of developing them, or for folks that have those conditions, can help reduce their symptoms. And I've seen at ACSM conferences and in publications that they just talk about, there's no medicine that has the breadth of benefit that exercise itself does, or any type of intervention. Or a really cool study I present in the class is, this was, it was less than a decade ago, where they had people that had some level of heart disease, and something needed to change. So they had some level of blockage in the coronary artery. They need to have something go in where they can open up that blockage, and oftentimes they'll use a stent. And so for this population of people, they randomized them to receive that procedure or to start doing exercise, and the exercise was walking. And and they found that, hey, the percentage of these two groups who had survived 10 years later and had a greatest level of function were the exercisers, versus the people that had that very specific problem fixed with the treatment, versus the people that actually were randomized to the exercise had the better outcomes even a decade later. And that goes to the fact that stent fixed one very specific thing that was their underlying problem, where exercise helped with that, but then it had all these other benefits that contributed to their improvements in their clinical outcomes.
Those reverberant effects.
Yeah, that's where this whole, the ACSM is big on, and has this whole kind of focus on, and the exercise is medicine.
Right.
And I think that's we're seeing how true, how true that is.
Yeah.
These research studies that keep coming out.
Because drugs just affect one pathway. They target one pathway, target one disease, but exercise itself beneficially affects the whole body, all the systems of the body.
I think that's a great way to look at it. I mean, you hear how exercise is good all the time, and it's healthy, but I don't think I've ever really heard it literally equated to some of the best medicine there is.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to argue with that point. And students always say, well, I always ask students, "Why has more side effects?" And like the medicine's like, well, it's actually exercise, but they're good.
Right.
Whereas many of those medications, they do have side effects, but the majority of those are. I mean, we all watch the TV commercials. I say, "Oh, that sounds like a great medicine," and they start talking about all the side effects. I'm like, "Wow!" And so it's it is. It's just really interesting,
ACSM's really been at the forefront of this. About 10 years ago, they came out with the Exercise Medicine Initiative, and their target was really physicians and trying to educate them and get them to promote physical activity to their patients.
All right, so move more, be healthier, live longer. It seems like it can really be that simple. Dr. Kyle Timmerman and Dr. Kevin Ballard, thank you so much for talking with me today. And you can find more episodes of our podcast available now on SoundCloud and on iTunes. And if you have any questions, you can also email us at reframe@miamioh.edu.